Welcome to the Measured Advertising Podcast. This is a podcast designed for business owners and entrepreneurs that are interested in advertising and marketing from a perspective of a place where you can measure it, you can track it, you can scale it, right? Putting real numbers around your marketing. So this is a podcast where we're really not going to talk about kind of shiny objects and new marketing tactics. We're going to talk about the old school methods that will work, whether it's our current year or whether it's 100 years from now. So if you're interested in those topics, continue to listen, and I just want to thank you for stopping by. All right, so welcome back to the Measured Advertising Podcast. Man, if you've made it to this episode, I just wanted to say thank you. That means you probably listened to the first one. You've decided that it was kind of worth your time, and here you are. So grateful to have you back for another episode. So today's episode, I kind of want to lay one of the most important foundational principles behind response-based marketing, that if you kind of apply this main principle, it's going to benefit you for probably years to come for sure, certainly, and it'll apply to all the different marketing campaigns that you might be running right now or you might consider running in the future. So this is kind of like what you would consider like a foundational principle that needs to be applied if you're interested in measurable response-based marketing. So I've mentioned it on the last podcast, but one of the most important books, if you're interested in this type of thing, and again, if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, and you are the kind of running the ship, or you have a team running the ship, and you really want to hold your marketing accountable, I would encourage you to at least understand these concepts, whether it's you specifically are the one deploying the campaigns and building them out, or if you have team members doing it. I would really encourage you to at least kind of chew on these concepts and understand them. And so, again, this is not something that I'm kind of coming up with and making up myself. This is taken from guys that have kind of pioneered the way behind measurable response-based marketing, again, pre-internet. So these principles are principles, right? Just that. They'll remain forever. So I would encourage you, again, even if you're not personally involved in your marketing, to at least understand these principles. So the main principle I want to talk about today is actually going to come from the book Scientific Advertising, written by Claude Hopkins. Again, this book was written, I think, just over 100 years ago. Actually, I think it was written in 1923. I'm looking at the cover of the book right here in front of me. Again, you can get this on Amazon or wherever for really cheap. So so Claude Hopkins is the author. Like, he was kind of like one of the early pioneers of, instead of the world of like general brand advertising, right? New York City, Chicago, a lot of these ad agencies back in the day, most of what they did at the time was general big, large brand, Fortune 500 brand advertising. And, Claude Hopkins and some of these pioneers kind of were working with clients and customers that were interested in getting a clear, measurable response from their advertising. So anyway, long story short, these guys have kind of pioneered the way for a lot of what people are doing today, current day in history of performance marketing or response-driven advertising. Like, these guys kind of pioneered the way. So it kind of makes sense to go to like the original source. Right now, of course, we don't know this for sure, but I'm just assuming you go back a couple thousand years, people in the marketplace selling fruit, selling produce, selling spices. I'm sure even back then, a lot of these people had some way to, measure and track their efforts as well. Again, maybe they weren't able to send out mass direct mail campaigns, but they might have had, salespeople in the marketplace. They had 10 different salespeople trying to sell apples or spices or whatever, and they kind of knew which salesperson performed best, and then maybe they allocated more resource to the one that performed best, right? So a lot of these concepts, although they were written about 100 years ago and are true, I'm sure they were applied 1,000 plus years ago, right? So this is kind of the meat. This is what we're going after with this podcast. So scientific advertising. And then if you want to go even a little bit deeper, there's another kind of harder to find gentleman. His name is John E. Kennedy. I think he worked for an ad agency called Lord and Thomas. He has a book called Reason Why Advertising, probably a little bit tricky to find, but if you kind of want to nerd out on a lot of this stuff and go back to these original sources, he might be another guy worth checking out. So, but on today's episode, I want to just kind of, again, touch on one of the key foundational principles. There's kind of a couple major foundational pieces, and this is going to be one of them. So this is actually taken from chapter 1 of Scientific Advertising, and the chapter title is called How Advertising Laws Are Established. So I'm going to kind of go over a couple different lines here. So before you get started with response-based advertising, right? Well, before you deploy a campaign, send the letters out, or launch the online advertising campaign, you first need a mechanism by which you can actually track results, right? I know that kind of sounds like, pretty self-explanatory, but if you're like me, or if you're like a lot of other people, at some point in your career, whether in business or marketing your business, you may have deployed a campaign with kind of the thought process of, let's just hope this works out and generates us some income, right? With no real mechanism by which you're tracking what's actually happening, right? Maybe the campaign worked great and you watch more customers walk in your door. Maybe you weren't totally sure if they came from your advertising campaign, but you kind of had a gut feeling like, well, we had more people show up this week than last week, so maybe it worked, right? So if you're like a lot of business owners in America and probably overseas as well, like majority of marketing is kind of done that way, right? Like if marketing is done, sometimes you're like, well, we're willing to spend X amount this month on ads and let's hope it works out. I remember I had a client that was running TV ads, and he didn't really have any traceable mechanism. He didn't have a specific phone number to use only for TV advertising. So if people called in, he knew they came off the TV commercial. There was no specific offer that people can walk in the door and mention, hey, I saw this on the TV commercial, right? So he had no way to track it, and he was just spending money every month hoping it would work. And for him, he was in a local market, and more than likely, it probably did bring him customers, but he had no way to measure and track to see if it would work. So when I worked with him, all we did was basically, we set up I didn't tell him to turn it off because he felt like at a gut level it was working. Again, no idea if it was or wasn't. But instead of telling him to turn it off, we just ran some online advertising in parallel to his TV advertising, and we just set up basic mechanism to track his efforts. And he ran a medical spa, and basically we had people with online advertising that would download a coupon for a specific discount, and they would just, when they walked in, they would just show the front desk person their coupon, and kind of easy peasy. Now this is early days, and there's much probably like you do some more fancy stuff to track, but for him it was really easy to see, hey, we spent X amount on Facebook advertising, we had X amount of people walk in the front door with this specific coupon that they can only get from seeing an ad, and we closed X amount of those people into X amount of services, and we made X amount of dollars, right? Like pretty straightforward, easy to track stuff, right? But if there was no mechanism in order to track that, you may or may not know if your marketing campaign is performing, right? So that's kind of the campaign as a whole. Now, you can also get more specific inside of your campaign. Let's say you're running an online advertisement, right, on Facebook or TikTok or LinkedIn or wherever you want to run your advertising. As a whole, of course, you can have a mechanism by which you track the entire campaign. Hey, we spent X amount. We spent 10 grand this month or 100 grand this month. We got X amount of leads, and then from those leads, X amount turned into customers, etc. So you could see the campaign as a whole, but where like the secret sauce is, again, there's no secret sauce, is you can also test down to the specific ad, right, at the actual ad level, or you could test by, there's so many different things you can test with your advertising, but you could say, hey, let's test 20 different headlines. Let's keep everything the same on the ad. We'll use the same picture, the same video, the same body of our copy, but the only thing let's tweak is our headline, and let's see which headline performs better. And again, if you've done this before, this is probably, again, for you, like common sense. You're like, yeah, dude, we should always test different headlines, because out of 10, probably one's going to be a clear winner and the rest are not. And then we run with that clear winner, and we've just saved ourselves a ton of money, and we made our marketing way more efficient by using the same dollars, right? So anyway, this is kind of the basic principle of tracking. But let's kind of look at the words of Claude Hopkins. He says, actually on the first page, he said, advertising that was once a gamble has thus become, under able direction, one of the safest of business ventures, right? So he's saying advertising that used to be a gamble, which is, again, this concept of like, even some of these big brands, like, let's deploy $1 million into this campaign. to promote our brand, to get our name out there, and then like let's hope it generates more income, right? So it's kind of a gamble. He said. So he's saying that advertising once was a gamble, but has thus become, under able direction, under the right kind of leadership and the right thought process and the right principles, has become one of the safest business ventures, right? And he says, certainly no other enterprise with comparable possibilities need involve so little risks. So how could he say that, right? How could he say that advertising is actually one of the safest ventures, the safest components of a business, and it's not like gambling? It's not like saying, hey, let's go buy this billboard and hope we get more customers, but it's actually one of the safest, most effective things you can do in your business. Well, if you're treating it from a measurable perspective, it really can be, right? Because before you spend $100,000, you can spend $1,000 first and test and see which headlines work, which ad angles work, which offers work first before you roll out into a bigger campaign, right? So you don't have to gamble $100,000 or $1 million or 10 million or 30 million, whatever it is, on a huge campaign. You could start small. You could start in a really, really local niche area. You can, whatever, spend $1,000 instead of 100 first and really test all the different variations, or as much as you can, before you roll out to a bigger audience, right? So he says this book deals not with theories or opinions, but with well-proven principles and facts. It is written as a textbook for students and a safe guide for advertisers. Every statement has been weighed. This book is confined to establish fundamentals. If we enter any realms of uncertainty, we shall carefully denote them. So basically, he's trying to lay the framework for this book about why advertising is a safe venture, why it can be done correctly, and it doesn't need to be a gamble. So let's continue further. He says, we learn the principles and prove them by repeated tests. This is the key. And he says this is done through keyed advertising, by traced returns, largely by the use of coupons. We compare one way with many others, backward and forward, and we record the results. When one method invariably proves best, that method becomes a fixed principle, right? So Claude is saying the reason why advertising can be a safe venture is because you can leverage tests to see what works and what doesn't work. And he says this is done largely through keyed advertising. So keyed advertising is a term that they used to use back in the day when they would create multiple different advertisements across newspapers, or even direct to consumer if they would send out like letters and direct mail. But a lot of it was done through newspaper advertising, that when people would see an ad in a newspaper and they would cut out the coupon and they would mail it in to a specific address to get whatever that offer is, like a free booklet or a free report, or have a salesperson actually come to their house and talk about whatever it might be, insurance or a home services thing or whatever, or to get a free product. That coupon would have a specific like numeric code on it, and when it would come in, when the mail would be received, each ad variation would have its own specific key. And so they were able to trace the returns. They were able to trace and measure the results of of all the different ads they wrote, right? So they're able to see, oh, wow, interesting. This one ad outperformed all the others by 10x or 2x or 3x. Okay, let's scrap the others. Let's keep that one, and let's test a bunch more, right? So he's saying we would compare one way with many others, backward and forward, and record the results. And he said when one method invariably proves best, that method becomes a fixed principle. So over time, again, you might be in the marketing game or business game for a while. You might realize that there's certain appeals that consumers are interested in. There are certain headlines that just continue to work over and over and over again for whatever reason. So I'll give you an example. We have a photography business, and one headline that just continues to work for whatever reason is when we use the headline that it'll say something like, this month, family photo sessions on specific beach. And we've tried like lots of different, and it seems like, wow, dude, that's such a simple headline. Of course, there's more to the ad, but that's the headline. This month, family 30-minute family photography session on this specific beach. We found that when we use the word this month or this week, for whatever reason, we do them every month, of course, but when people feel like something is actively, this is my assumption, I don't know why people respond to it, but they do respond to it based off of tests. It seems like when there's a specific date and a specific location, if there's something about that compels people to fill out a form to kind of learn more, as opposed to we would use headlines like, if you're a family living in such and such, feeling like it's time to get photos done, so on and so forth, those headlines are kind of vague and just obviously calling out a specific people, but did those type of things would not perform as well as this month or this week photo session happening here, right? Just as an example for our business. I believe it was John Caples, another ad guy. One of his best performing ads was a headline that said something like, "They laughed when I said I could play the piano, but when I sat down to play, ... So they laughed when headline. So you may have seen that headline around. It could have been used before. In fact, I've used that type of headline on different businesses. They laughed when I said, fill in the blank, but when I did fill in the blank, ... It's kind of like a curiosity thing. So again, these are just examples. I'm not saying apply them to your business, but what I am saying is, and what Claude is saying is, over time, when you're able to trace your results, you start to figure out there's certain angles, there's certain headline types that people are just attracted to for whatever reason, right? You can kind of pontificate and think about, why do people respond to that versus this? You may not ever come to a clear answer, but the numbers will tell you this headline people respond to, this one they don't. And it could change depending on your business and your product, your service, etc. But when you play the game of looking at advertising from a measurable point of view, you'll start coming to some of these conclusions, and you'll have an arsenal of headlines. You might test a couple hundred headlines and you end up with like 10 that are these are solid headlines that always work for us, right? And that's good, because when you can go from spreading your advertising budget across 100 different headlines and you have a blended cost, and then you can say, okay, well, 10 of these really worked. Let's scrap the 90%. And now you're putting all of your marketing budget toward the 10% that worked. Now you're spreading your dollar so much more efficiently, instead of across 100 ads and 10 really are working, and you're blending the cost. Now you're isolating the 10 and putting all of your marketing budget there, right? So it's pretty sweet when you can, even if you keep the exact same marketing budget month in, month out, month in, month out, you can actually make your marketing more and more and more and more efficient using the same exact advertising dollars, theoretically, by testing and testing and testing and sticking with the winners and cutting the losers, right? It's like a garden. You're putting a ton of seed down, and you're just constantly removing the weeds and watering the good stuff, right? So this is the beauty of using, again, tested advertising. So he goes on to say that, he says, mail order advertising is traced down to the fraction of a penny. The cost per reply and the cost per dollar of sale show up with utter exactness. So mail order advertising, again, back then it's kind of like, e-commerce, trying to sell things, trying to sell physical products or goods, having people not just send in a coupon with their information, like their name and their home address, etc., but also mailing in real money, right? So that's kind of the hardest form of advertising, right? Is to get a stranger to read a newspaper ad, to cut out a coupon with their information, and to actually put real money into an envelope and send it out. That's hard. And so he was saying that mail order advertisers, it's so important that they're able to get a return on their money, because that is the mechanism by which they make sales, that there can't be any fluff involved. They have to know down to a penny which ad is producing results, right? So he said one ad is compared with another, one method with another. Headlines, settings, sizes, arguments, and pictures are compared. And he said to reduce the cost of results, even 1% means a whole lot in some mail order advertising. So no guesswork is permitted. One must know what is best. He said, thus, mail order advertising first established many of our basic laws, right? So this is the principle. So what does it mean for your business, right? So if you run a local business or an online business selling products or services, whatever the case is how do you set up a mechanism by which you can actually trace your results, right? So again, let's say you run a roofing business and your model is, people go to your website, they fill out a form, someone on your team gives them a call, you schedule an appointment, somebody goes out to that appointment, inspects the roof. If it needs to be replaced, you present an offer of what it costs to replace the roof, and a percentage of those turn into sales, right? So that's the sales process, let's say, for that business. Well, then the question is, okay, well, how do we apply it to our advertising? So maybe you're running Google ads, right? And you look at your business and you say, okay, an average roof repair is worth X amount of dollars to us in gross revenue or gross profit. And we're able to, from that gross profit, we're willing to spend X amount of money on advertising to acquire a customer. Okay, cool. So let's backtrack. So then how many people do we need to meet face to face in order to have one person sign a deal with us? Well, maybe you need 5. Okay, cool. So then we take our overall marketing budget, divide it by 5. That's how much we're willing to pay per appointment. Okay, cool. Now let's look at our Google ads. Are we currently getting scheduled appointments from our Google ads at that cost, right? And so on and so forth. And you backtrack it. How many form fills do we need to get one appointment booked, right? And you look at your entire process and you put a number on it, right? And then as you're running your marketing, or you have somebody that's managing your marketing, you're looking at your campaign and you're looking at ads. You might see, hey, of the 3 different Google text ads that we're running, one of them is getting us leads and getting us appointments at a really great price, and the other 2 are not. Okay, cool. Well, now we know that. Let's turn off the other 2, right? And this is kind of the game you're playing. So I would encourage you, if you haven't done this already for your business, to kind of sit down and establish, what is a win for your business? If you need to get a certain cost per order for selling a physical product, through Facebook advertising, well, what's the most you can afford to pay? Great. Okay. So now when it comes to our advertising, we can approach it from that point of view, right? And when it comes to actually tracking your advertising, the nice part is, unlike kind of 100 years ago when they would do keyed advertising, which you can still key your advertising now offline, with online, you can use stuff like UTMs, right? So these are like essentially little keys that you could put on the end of your website domain. So it'd be like, bobsroofingcompany.com/ and then you would have a whole string of code or a whole string of text that you can use to track your specific ad campaign. So if it's Google ads, you can track which keyword drove a result, which ad drove a result, etc., right? So you can really look at your marketing efforts from a scientific point of view, right? So this is kind of the framework that Claude is laying out, that your advertising doesn't need to be a gamble, that it can be a very safe venture when you approach it from this keyed, traceable perspective, right? Like you said, even mail order advertisements, he's like, they got to make a profit because they're trying to get someone to mail in a check or mail in some cash, and that's hard. So they really need to track and put all of their efforts into the advertising that's generating the highest return, right? So they measure all of this stuff, right? Or they measured. And so, nowadays, a lot of people do the same thing. Again, online, if they're selling, big direct-to-consumer e-commerce brands are doing this online. A lot of them are. Some of them are still heavy in the branding side, and that's cool too. But a lot of them are using these response-based, trackable, measurable mechanisms. So if you're again, in business and you're not already tracking and measuring your results, maybe you have an ad agency that's running your marketing for you, which is great. Maybe they give you like monthly reporting. All that's good. But I would say if you don't clearly understand what your numbers look like and how that campaign is either clearly working within your allotted, at your allowable numbers within your KPI metrics, if you don't clearly know if it's working or not, I would say to at least establish the foundation now. Like, do that now before you layer in additional advertising or you ramp up your ad spend or whatever. Make sure you clearly understand how your campaigns are performing, and what your costs look like, and so that way you can do more testing. You could test more ads, you could test more offers, you can tweak your landing pages and see how that changes the numbers favorably or unfavorably, right? And truthfully, a lot of the tests you're going to do are not going to be good outcomes, and a lot of them are going to fail, and that's okay too. But you will find some winners, and when you find those winners, then you shift most of your budget to the winners, right? And you start making your marketing more efficient and more effective, just like the mail order guys, right? They would find the ads that performed absolutely best and keep those running, and then they would continue to test and try to get better and better performing ads. So this is kind of the key foundation. I know it's probably seems really basic, but I just know for me personally and other business owners, like how seldom it actually gets applied, where people are really just measuring their campaigns well, and they're testing and trying to find new winning ads, offers, and hooks, etc. So this is a game that we all need to improve upon, including myself. I like to say that I probably test a good amount when it comes to my advertising, but I know I could do a much better job keeping a closer eye on it and doing more tests. But so anyway, this is my encouragement to you. I'd pick up, again, scientific advertising if you haven't. and give it a read. So this is it for this episode. Just wanted to cover one of the foundational pillars is making sure you set up testing mechanisms and tracing mechanisms to actually trace your results. And hopefully this was interesting. So that's it for today, and I will see you on the next episode.